everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and it's that time to talk about my favorite books of 2020. This was such a hard decision. I have a very long list here and I'm sure I'll think of even more books that I loved and that made deep impressions on me after I finish filming this video. But I will start with the books that I gave 5 stars to last year, and then I have a list of books that I did not give 5 stars to, but that made a deep impression on me and have stuck with me and gave me great joy. So the first book of my 5-star books of last year was The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. This has been making the rounds, and it continues to make the rounds on BookTube. And no wonder, it is a wonderful piece of nonfiction about the 5 known victims of Jack the Ripper and uncovering all of their lives and making them whole women and uncovering a lot of other issues in Victorian society, such that you hear almost nothing about Jack the Ripper. Rubenhold is very careful to focus solely on these 5 women and prove that they were not prostitutes. They were ordinary women living their lives in really terrible circumstances. And it's an important book. It's a fascinating book. I love Hallie Rubenhold's other books. Well, the one other book of hers that I've read so far. And I would highly recommend this one. The next piece that I gave 5 stars to was Cyrano de Bergerac, which of course is by Edmond Rostand, but was adapted by Martin Crimp in this new version. I got to see a live performance of it back in the winter, I believe, so it would have been early 2020, I think, starring James McAvoy. And this new production takes exactly the plot of Cyrano de Bergerac. They do not change a lot there, but they have changed the poetry to be more of a spoken word, beat poetry sort of style. And to be honest, I wasn't sure how it was going to work. I wasn't sure if I would love it as much as the original, because I love older poetry, especially pre-19th century poetry. There's something just extra special about it. And I wasn't sure that a modern poetic style could produce those same emotions, but it could. It produced even deeper emotions than the original play. It was so moving, so beautifully performed. Now that the National Theatre has their streaming service, I don't know if this will ever be on that service, but if you can see even a fraction of this play or read through it for yourself, it was amazing and I would highly recommend it. It was supposed to transfer to Brooklyn in May as well. Clearly that did not happen, but hopefully once things are safer, that will start to be in the works again, because I think so many more people should see it than probably did. The next book that I gave 5 stars to was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I had read The Night Circus ages ago. I remembered liking it, but I wasn't sure if this was going to be my favorite, and I have to be honest, for the first few pages, it wasn't exactly my favorite. But then I hit a turning point in the plot, and as the book sped faster and faster towards its conclusion, I was more and more wrapped up in it. And it is just the most absorbing and beautiful piece of fantasy, and it was a magical moment. That's all I can say. It was a magical moment. The next book I gave 5 stars to because I feel so passionately about the subject, and that was How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare by Ken Ludwig. This book does exactly what it says. It is a step-by-step guide for how to introduce your children to Shakespeare, why it's important that they be familiar with Shakespeare, how to help them memorize chunks of Shakespeare, not just so that they can pull them out at dinner parties and impress people, but so that they can learn to savor and appreciate the language and the structure and the imagery, how to help them break down the plots so they're not as intimidating. It's a really, really wonderful book because not only does it stress all of these wonderful things about appreciating Shakespeare at a young age, but it also stresses that you personally do them with your child, which of course is a wonderful parent-child bonding experience, all of which I heartily applaud. My next 5-star read was The World Only Spins Forward, The Ascent of Angels in America by Isaac Butler and Dan Coys. This is an oral history of the play Angels in America, and Isaac Butler and Dan Coys have interviewed every member of every cast of Angels in America, whether it be the original cast, touring casts, the most recent casts from the National Theatre and Broadway, the film cast, everyone who had ever been involved with this who is still living has been interviewed, and it charts the play from its conception and its run in San Francisco all the way up to the modern day, as well as the history of the AIDS epidemic that inspired and plays so heavily in Angels in America. It was a beautiful, beautiful read. Some of these cast members went through moments that I could not imagine going through myself, especially when you were involved in such an emotional and engrossing play. But throughout everything that they went through, they always had hope that they would come out the other side, which we have. And the play expresses that same hope that we will come out the other side of this plague that was the AIDS epidemic. And to read that in the middle of our current pandemic and be reminded of that was so incredible. So if you are not familiar with Angels in America, go see or read Angels in America. In fact, the Broadway cast recorded a version for Audible. So if you read it while listening to that production, I think it would be really incredible. And then go forth and read this book. The next book that I gave 5 stars was Tulip Fever by Deborah Magach. This was a book that I had been meaning to read for ages because I actually saw the film first before I realized that it was a novel. And this is the story of a young woman who is married to a much older merchant in Amsterdam in the 17th century, who begins to fall in love with a painter, and it charts the course of their romance and a plot that they hatch to help themselves live the life that they would like, that involves getting into the tulip market, which was booming at the time. Everyone had succumbed to tulip fever. I knew that I would like it because I did enjoy the film very much. What I didn't expect was that the writing style would be so beautiful and so engrossing. I think I read this in 1 or 2 days. It was so incredible. I would highly, highly recommend this if you have or have not seen the film. It is truly wonderful. The next book that I gave 5 stars to was Girls to the Rescue, Book 1 by Bruce Lenski, which is a collection of fairy tales and folk tales in which the heroine saves the day. There are no damsels in distress in this collection at all. And this was a book that I remembered reading as a child, but that I never owned. And so I spent lots of time over the summer trying to track it down. And once I did find myself a copy, I reread it. And I am so glad that I read this when I was a child, that there were so many other books in this series for other children to read, and that children can continue to read them now. I would highly recommend this if you have any young girls in your lives. And my last 2 5-star reads were very recent. The first was How Much Land Does a Man Need by Leo Tolstoy. This is a collection of 2 short stories, How Much Land Does a Man Need, which is a comment on consumerism and greed, and the second is called What Men Live By, which is a more hopeful tale of a shoemaker who is poor to start with, and this year has been very poor, and he knows he's being cheated out of payment, but he can't do anything about it, and he's very discouraged. But as he's walking home, he finds this naked man lying in the churchyard, and after a struggle, decides to help him and bring him home, and how that man changes his life and his family's life. They are deeply grounded in a religious morality, but I don't think that you need to be religious to appreciate the sentiments. And especially reading them around Christmas and hearing that message of generosity and caring for your fellow man was truly inspirational, and I really enjoyed both of these stories. And the last book that I gave 5 stars to, I finished on New Year's Eve, which was The Lady of the Camellias by Alexandre Dumas fils, which is semi-autobiographical of his relationship with a Parisian courtesan, Marie Duplessis. This was the inspiration for the opera La Traviata and also for the film Moulin Rouge. It was incredible. The emotiveness of the writing, especially considering that it is in translation, was wonderful. It was so beautiful. And his social commentary on why these women are in this position and how dare we of society condemn them when we have made the constricting rules that have put them in this place, were so impassioned. I could see both of the storylines that inspired Moulin Rouge and La Traviata, and I wasn't sure how they were going to work together, but they did wonderfully. And it also references Manon Lescaut, which luckily I had just read right before diving into this book. And being able to contrast those 2 heroines and the choices that they make in order to pursue the loves of their lives was a wonderful experience and made it that much richer. So I would highly recommend reading this if you are at all considering it. So those were all of my 5-star reads. The next books are books that were at least 4 stars and have left a deep and lingering impression on me. The first was volume 2 of Check Please, which was called Sticks and Scones. This was the most wonderful book. I read it straight through on Easter Day when it arrived. It was just wonderful. Check Please is about Eric Bittman, otherwise known as Biddy, who goes off to college at Samuel University and joins the men's hockey team. And he's in for a bit of a shock as he hasn't actually played hockey before. He was a figure skater, but this is as close as he's going to get to continuing to skate in college. Plus, he's gay, and he might be falling for another member of the team. And it is the sweetest, most life-affirming book. You get so attached to all of these characters. I felt as though I wanted to cry when one of these characters graduated, and that was only halfway through the series. It is so wonderful. It's full of baking and sweetness, and they are really funny besides. Every character has such a unique voice. You can hear it perfectly. I really hope that this continues at some point, although I realize it can't continue forever. But this was a wonderful, wonderful conclusion to it for the moment. Both of the volumes are available in paperback if you'd like to buy them bound up together. Or you can always go online, because it was a webcomic first, so you can read the entire thing there if you so choose. The next book I don't have with me because I borrowed it from my friend Jonathan ages ago and only read it in the spring of this year, and that was The Butterfly Mosque by G. Willow Wilson. I had read The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson the year before and really loved it. It was a wonderful fantasy novel set in Muslim-ruled Spain. It was just incredible. And so Jonathan lent me this book, The Butterfly Mosque, which is her memoir of her conversion to Islam and her time living in Egypt, especially post 9/11. And I have not been able to stop thinking about certain portions of this book. I feel like she gave me such a clear picture of what living in Egypt was like, about how quiet falling in love can be, because, spoiler alert, she does meet her husband while she's living in Egypt. The beauty as well as the struggle of a cross-cultural relationship, the struggle of being a new convert to a religion and having such passionate feelings about something, or at least such a deep connection to something, that the rest of your family doesn't quite understand. Really, she expressed that sadness and that forgiveness so well. It's a really wonderful read, and I would highly recommend it. The next book that has really stuck with me was Les Liaisons Dangerous by Pierre Choderlos de Laclos. Of course, translated from the French. I'm not that good. It was translated by P.W.K. Stone, and I apologize for not mentioning the other translators of my earlier books, but if you look them up with the links down below, those translators will be credited on the Goodreads page. Les Liaisons Dangerous is an epistolary novel from 18th century France that consists mainly of letters between two aristocrats who are former lovers who have grown a bit bored lately, and so they concoct a scheme, almost a bet, to see if the Vicomte de Valmont can seduce this confirmed and very devout widow. And if he can, the Marquise de Merteuil will take him back. And it charts all of their progress in these relationships. And as things begin to turn out not entirely the way they expected them to, the fractures and the fact that they allow their true feelings to come to the surface but too late. It is so well written. It is funny. It is frustrating. It is fascinating. Some of these characters you would not want to meet in real life, but they are utterly engrossing on the page. And I can absolutely see why it was banned in France for a while, because since it's from the 18th century, I did not expect it to be as explicit as it was. It's certainly not explicit in the way that Fanny Hill is explicit. It's not porn level explicit, if I can be that frank. But it does explore very frankly why people behave this way, not just how they behave this way. The clergy and the ruling classes were trying to keep a lid on things. This novel certainly would not have helped. But it is a fascinating read today, as well as the play by Christopher Hampton, which was based upon this novel. The next novel that I really loved and was utterly engrossed in was The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. I read this back in August. And yes, I was engrossed in it because we were in the middle of a massive power cut at the time. But each of the characters was so distinct, and I really felt that I got into the heads of each one of them. This novel follows three women, one in the 18th century, one in the 1950s who is newly married to a widower, and one young woman in the 21st century who is asked to clean out her grandmother's apartment. And slowly you begin to see how all three of these stories overlap and interweave. It is the story of how women become marginalized and used, but from such fascinating perspectives. The writing in this is absolutely incredible. And I can't really describe it more than that. It's something that you have to experience for yourself. So definitely pick this up and let me know what you think. The next book that has stayed with me and was just an utter joy is a bit of a cheat because it's Pages & Co. and I actually read the entire series this year. But I picked the first one because I think that was my absolute favorite, although the other two are also very, very good. And these are all by Anna James. This is a book about Tilly Pages, who's a young girl living with her grandparents who run a bookshop, Pages & Co. And one day she discovers that she and her family are book wanderers, which means they can literally step into a book and wander around in the plot. And sometimes their favorite characters can come out of the books and visit them. But Tilly begins to wonder if all of this could be connected to her mother's disappearance. And that's when things get particularly intriguing. This whole series is every book lover's dream, of course. All of us want to be able to wander through our favorite books, as well as it references so many wonderful classics and childhood favorites. But more than that, I loved how physically whimsical it was. She plays with the text on the page so beautifully. Such as here, when describing the shop cat Alice, who is batting at the word Alice, as cats will, and knocks it off center. And she plays with the font like that often. Not all the time, but every now and again, they'll play with the font just a little bit to mirror whatever's going on. So it just makes it that much more fun to curl up with and read, and I would highly recommend this entire series. Another book that was an utter joy to read, well, perhaps that's the wrong word, but it was utterly engrossing, was The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeil. I read this back in February. Again, I think I read it in one day because I was traveling at the time, so I had a lot of time on ferries to read this. It was incredible. It's the story of Iris and Silas. Iris is a young woman working in a doll factory, but who would love to be a painter in her own right, and eventually falls in with a fictionalized version of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and begins to explore her artistic side. She and Silas run into each other at the Great Exhibition, and to Iris it's nothing, but to Silas it's everything. And Silas is a collector. And after that meeting, he decides Iris would be the perfect next addition to his collection. It is fascinating, it is creepy, it is gripping, and it's a wonderful Victorian treat of historical fiction. Definitely go and read it if you've been thinking about it. And my last books that have made a deep impression on me are again a bit of a cheat because they're two books in fact, and those are The Diaries of Anne Lister. There are 2 volumes so far. There are The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister and No Priest But Love. I actually wrote to Helena Whitbread and begged her, well, I asked her if she would be publishing any more of Anne Lister's diaries, and she wrote back and said, well, no, not right now, but she does have a biography in the works, which is nice, and I will certainly read it, and I'm sure it will be wonderful. But I would love to have more of her diaries decoded. Let me explain. Anne Lister was a woman in the early 19th century. She wasn't quite Regency, but she wasn't quite Victorian either. The bulk of her adventures take place in the 1820s and 1830s. For example, this first edition starts in 1816 when she is in her late teens and goes until, I think, 1824. And the second volume goes from 1824 to 1826. Anne Lister was a prolific diary keeper, and we have volumes and volumes and volumes of her diaries where she recorded every aspect of her life in minute detail. But half of those diaries were in a code that she created herself. And various people broke that code, but no one was brave enough to actually publish the unbroken code until the 1990s, I believe, when Helena published the first editions of these diaries. Because the reasons that great sections were coded were because Anne Lister was gay. And she created that code so that she could write about her affairs with other women and not be caught. Not only was she incredibly brave to live as openly gay as she could at the time, but she was also almost entirely self-educated. She taught herself instruments, multiple languages, how to run a business and an estate. She dressed very unusually. She did not follow typical women's fashions. She traveled more widely than I think any other woman would have at that time. She was utterly incredible, and she is now one of my biggest inspirations in terms of efficiency and a go-getter attitude. And reading her diaries was absolutely incredible. If you're at all interested in Anne Lister, though, I wouldn't recommend starting with the diaries. I would recommend starting with this biography, Gentleman Jack, by Angela Steidele, which is also translated by someone. Katie Derbyshire, or Derbyshire. I'm not sure if you pronounce it the same way as the county. This biography I read last year in 2019, so it no longer counts. But it does lay out who everyone was in Anne Lister's life and how the events of her life played out. And once you have that blueprint down, her diaries make much more sense and you can follow them a lot more easily. But I would still highly recommend finding out more about Anne Lister. She is also the basis for the HBO show Gentleman Jack, as the second volume says here, which I would also highly recommend. It is so wonderfully acted by every single member of the cast. So there you have it. Those were my favorite and most impressive reads of 2020. Like I said, I'm sure I'll think of more. You can go back and check out my back catalog of wrap-ups for more recommendations. And I can't wait to see what my favorite books of 2021 will be. I'm already reading some great ones, and I have a lot more wonderful books on the cards. Let me know what some of your favorite reads of 2020 were, or if you're inspired to read any of these recommendations. And is there something that you're really looking forward to reading this year? Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.